It's interesting that as we look around us, as we live our lives, we are constantly reminded that material wealth or material possessions are available to us, and we should pursue them. We should get as much as we can, and we should use as many opportunities as we have available to us to make sure that that wealth comes in our direction. Some people have made the choice that they will do so not because of hard work, not because of commitment to a task or to a vision or to a purpose or to a skill, but they will do so by any means necessary, out of an attitude of greed, out of an attitude of simply making more at the expense of others. We've seen this so clearly demonstrated in recent days in the nation of Kenya. We've seen people being taken to court on corruption charges. We've seen buildings built illegally on riparian lands being destroyed and removed. We've seen people pay the price for greed. But at the same time, I think it's an important lesson and a means for us to learn how to be truly generous and to remember the God who gives us power to get wealth. My name is Reverend Kwame Rubadiri, and I just want to conclude today our thoughts on the whole subject of generosity or greed. And we want to look at what God's perspective is on this entire subject. Join me in a few moments right here on CITAM Church Online. Towards the end of chapter 13, God has a conversation, God himself has a conversation with Abraham. Abraham has, as we remember from the beginning of the chapter, come back from Egypt. He's come back a very wealthy man, extremely wealthy, back to the area of his initial home or original home in the land of Canaan. He builds an altar to God, and the Bible says he calls upon the name of the Lord. The Bible then goes on to include another character in the story. His name is Lot. And Lot also came back with Abraham, also a very rich man, both of them extremely wealthy, so wealthy that the land itself could not contain their flocks. I don't think we've seen that situation play itself out in our lifetimes or even in our experience, but that's how rich these men were. The animals they had could not be satisfied or contained on the land, the huge portions of land that they had in the land of Canaan. But this is the conversation that Abraham has with God from verses 14 to 18 of chapter 13 of Genesis. And the Lord said to Abraham, after Lot had separated from him, lift your eyes now and look from the place where you are, northward, southward, eastward, and westward. For all the land which you see, I will give to you and your descendants forever. And I'll make your descendants as the dust of the earth, so that if a man could number the dust of the earth, then your descendants also could be numbered. Arise, walk in the land through its length and its width, for I give it to you. This is the end of God's quote to Abraham. Then Abraham moved his tent, went and dwelt by the terebinth trees of Mamre, which are in Hebron, and built an altar there to the Lord. Abraham took very seriously his relationship with God. As we saw at the beginning of the chapter, he gets home, first thing he does is he builds an altar to God. He doesn't show off his money, doesn't show off his animals, he doesn't show off his great wealth. And now, after making the mature decision to allow his nephew to take the better land, the better property, God begins to speak to him, because God knows he has Abraham's attention. He has not only Abraham's wealth, but he also has Abraham's heart. And because he has Abraham's heart, he knows he can speak to Abraham about what the wealth will do for him and his family in the future. God makes Abraham a phenomenal promise. He says, everything you see will be given not just to you, but to your descendants. In other words, all the wealth that you can imagine that's available to you will not just be enjoyed by you, but it will outlive you. It will be enjoyed by your children and their children and their children and their children and all their children for generations to come. That's the kind of wealth, or that's the kind of influence that you and I want to have. Not just to have a name for ourselves and say, well, so-and-so was one of the wealthiest men in the country or in the continent or in the world for that matter, but rather that their wealth multiplied to generations that followed. When you think of some of the wealthiest families, not just in Africa, but even in the United States or other parts of the world, the wealth didn't just come from the current generation. It may go back 6, 7, 10, 14, 20 generations before, because the individuals who had started building that wealth had a generous spirit. When you get a chance, and I ask you to Google this story, Google the story of John D Rockefeller I. He was the first billionaire, true billionaire in American history. He was a man who developed the oil industry, and some people believe that he, as a result of his choices, was the reason for the growth of the middle class in the United States. A fascinating story. What's true about John D. Rockefeller, as has been recorded in the history books, is that he gave away almost half of the wealth that he had acquired during his own lifetime. But he still left billions, not only for his children, grandchildren, great-great-grandchildren, but to 7 generations existing in the United States today. And he gave to churches, he gave to hospitals, he gave to missions, he gave money to entire institutions. And he developed them because he had a generous attitude. He knew this wealth was not something he could contain or consume for himself. And as a result, Abraham, recognizing that he could not consume all this wealth for himself, and he had a purpose, he had a legacy that God was building, knew that unless he trusted God, nothing that he had would ever be passed on to anyone else in his family. And so Abraham's position of generosity, spirit of generosity in his heart, allowed God to entrust him, and not only him, but the generations that followed him, with the great wealth that we see is available to the nation of Israel to this day. So here is our great lesson. God will give you and I far more than we ever thought we could possibly contain for ourselves if we simply follow his direction and cultivate a spirit of generosity wherever we go. This story in Genesis chapter 13 is a prime example of the two extremes, how somebody who is truly generous is blessed by God even more than they've ever imagined, not just for themselves, but for the things that will outlive them, and how someone who is truly selfish and greedy loses it all from one decision where they allow their greed to take over their desire to get more wealth. So this is our challenge. Put yourself in Abraham's shoes. Put yourself in a position where you relate to God and you see God watching over your resources, and put yourself in a position to hear from God with respect to what to do with those resources, because God will never be outgiven by you, and he will give you far more than you and I could ever expect. I hope you'll join us again at the next opportunity for CITAM Church Online. Always follow us on Twitter. You can watch us on Facebook, make a comment, ask any question. If you need prayer, we'll be more than happy to pray for you. We have posts on Instagram, and of course you can watch us on our YouTube channel on CITAM Church Online. My name is Reverend Kwame Rubadiri. It's always a pleasure to be with you. God bless you.